Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom, and in this video we're going to be covering one of my favorite books. So you can't even see this. This is Anne of Green Gables by L.M Montgomery, also known as Lucy Maud Montgomery MacDonald. MacDonald is in fact her married name. She married Reverend MacDonald, who, well, that was after this book. Let's just say she married beneath her and he was really, really crazy. He was a Baptist minister. Even the Baptists thought he was nuts. Yeah, for reference on that. Obviously, this was written long before she married him. But yeah, he was one of those ministers who believed that you were destined to heaven or hell no matter what you did in life. And yeah, him, her, and their kids were destined for hell for some reason. But again, that has nothing to do with this book. That's Lucy Maud Montgomery. But this is her first book. It's she'd written various things over the years. So, but this came out, I believe, in like 1908. The book itself, the original publication. Yeah, the first published in 1908. So in this story, we meet Anne Sherley. So this is kind of her tale. At first, you meet, though the first character we meet is Rachel Lynde. Now, she is one of the side characters throughout these stories. She is a nosy neighbor. She's not bad. She's just nosy. She wants to know what everybody else is going on. And the book starts with she's looking out her window and she sees Matthew Cuthbert. Now, him and his sister Marilla lives in a little house, Green Gables, that's set off the road, hiding. Matthew Cuthbert is a very quiet man. He's with his buggy. This is the, I'm trying to think, this is, the book is set roughly around, I think, the 1890s. And I was kind of able to figure this out because there's a chapter in this book called Puffed Sleeves, where Anne, our main character, yes, that's the cat, wants a puffed sleeve dress. And that's when those were in fashion. So, but moving on. So Matthew is going to town, which Rachel Lynde finds very unusual. She goes and talks to Marilla, and she says, we asked a woman by the name of Miss Stacy to bring us a young boy, about 11 or 12, from an orphanage in Nova Scotia. So this takes place on Prince Edward Island. Now, Prince Edward Island is a place. It is the smallest province in Canada. I have actually been there. It's very, very beautiful. These days you can access it by bridge. A very, very long bridge. It's a very, very, very long bridge across the Atlantic. That stretches across a portion of the North Atlantic. So otherwise you can also take a ferry, which is how it would be ferry and train. This is how you get there in this time period. So this is basically it's a decent sized farm. The island is mostly mostly farms and lighthouses, and I don't think the boat building was still going on. It may have been in canneries and fishing. So Marilla, most of the people in the fictional town of Avonlea, which is based on Cavendish, which is where L.M Montgomery grew up with her grandparents, because her mother died of tuberculosis when she was just under 2, and then her father eventually went to Nova Scotia to work, and I think she lived with him for a year at one point in time, but then they didn't get along. Went back to, she was devoted to her grandparents, who were very, very religious. So, nevertheless, back to this. So Miss Lynde goes to talk to Marilla, and they want a boy from the orphanage to help on the farm, because they're in their 50s. So they're not getting any younger, and they need help. So Matthew goes to the train station and meets Anne, a little girl of 11 years old. She's the only one there. There was a mistake. So he brings her home. Now, Matthew is afraid of girls and women in general. He's a very, very quiet man. They pretty much describe him that women terrify him, particularly young girls. But Anne chatters. She talks a lot, and she puts him at ease, and he finds her just able to do all the talking and listen to her stories and her imagination, how she gives things different names, how horrible the orphanage was. And he's like, he doesn't know what to do. He's like, I'm going to let Marilla deal with this. So they get to the house. They find out the mistake. Marilla's not quite sure what to do. She's not going to throw Anne out. So Anne goes upstairs and sleeps. And then she goes to talk to Miss Stacy. Well, Miss Stacy says that how the mistake was made. But it's like there's another woman in town who has a bunch of small children who could take her. And now, prior to this, we learn a bit of Anne's backstory. Her parents died when she was very young. She was taken in by another local woman who ended up having children, and was essentially treated like a servant and helping take care of those children, obviously once she was old enough. And then this woman's husband died, and I believe the first one, and she left, and Anne was basically passed on. And she was passed on once or twice and basically used as a housekeeper and nanny. And one of the women had multiple sets of twins, and I think eventually her husband died, and she sent her children off to various different family members, and Anne ended up at the children's home. Basically, it was an orphanage. And Marilla hears all this and feels sorry for Anne. And so when it's offered that this other woman who has children, who pretty much seems horrible, will take Anne, and Marilla's like, yeah, no. So before she even tells Anne, she's made the decision not to give her up. It's like, you know what? I'll just raise her. She needs she needs bringing up. So that's kind of how it starts, and Anne ends up having various different issues as the course of this book goes on. I can go through kind of the chapters here. So it's not a hugely long book. Okay, it's about 416 pages, which again, but yeah, we have Miss Rachel Lynde is surprised, Matthew Cuthbert is surprised, Marilla Cuthbert is surprised, Morning at Green Gables. Then you have Anne's history, where we find out about Anne's history. Marilla makes up her mind. Anne says her prayers. Now, there is religion in this book because it is very, very common in this time period. It's not done in detail. It's more of a people story. So Anne's bringing up has begun. She has to be taught to pray and how to behave. She insults Miss Rachel Lynde. Miss Rachel Lynde is properly horrified because Rachel Lynde insults her hair. Not now, cat. And Anne has an apology, and then she gets to go to Sunday school, which is Miss Rachel Lynde teaches Sunday school. Yes, she's nosy, but she gets her work done, and she's nice to people. She's not nasty. She's nice to people, as opposed to occasionally this cat. So, Kendra, by the time you see this, she'll be, 14 and a half? She's an old cat. I've had her for a long, long time. All right, moving on. A solemn vow and a promise, which I have something to do with, if I remember correctly, and vowing not to do things. The delights in and meeting Diana Barry. Now, Diana Barry is the daughter of a wealthy family who lives up on a hill. She is proper, well brought up. She is destined to become basically a mistress of her own home. They are very, very well, but she's essentially sent, I believe she eventually gets married off. The delights of anticipation, this has to do with a church party. Then there's Anne's confession. Now what happens in this story is Marilla loses a brooch, and she thinks Anne took it. Anne eventually confesses to taking it just so she could go to this social, and eventually Marilla finds it on a shawl, and she has to apologize to Anne. And then the tempest in the school teapot, which I can't remember what that is. Diana is invited to tea with tragic results, and this is one of the more interesting stories. So, Morella is going out. I can't remember where the heck she's going, but Anne is going to be left to take care of Matthew, and she says you can have Diana Barry over to tea, and it's like you guys can drink the leftover raspberry cordial, which is a non-alcoholic drink, with your tea. And she tells Anne where it is. Anne goes gets it, but it turns out that it's wine. And why Anne doesn't really drink much of it. Diana drinks a bunch of it, gets drunk. And despite Marilla going up and explaining to Diana's mother that this was not Anne's fault at all, it was hers. Yeah, Diana's very proper mother is still not happy, and it has pretty much forbids Diana from seeing Anne. So then we have a new interest in life, which means Anne is much more focused on her schooling. Then Anne to the rescue. Now, what happens in this one, this is kind of an interesting part, is there's in Charlottetown, which, yes, again, is the capital of Prince Edward Island. Yes, it's a place. There's a premier, which I'm assuming is a member of the parliament, and he's coming to town. And so a lot of people, including Morella, Rachel Lynde, and multiple, a lot of it, Diana Barry's family, parents, are all going to listen to him speak. And so it's evening, Morella and Matthew Anne and Matthew are talking, and Diana shows up, because she lives obviously within walking distance. They're very close. And her little sister has croup, and is coughing, and is very, very sick. And she's coming to get Anne, because she knows Anne has handled children, and they had left like one of the local teenager to look after them, and she has no idea what to do. So Anne comes over and grabs Ipecac, common remedy back then, and comes over and helps. And they're using steam, and Matthew goes to get the doctor. It takes him several hours. By the time he gets back, the little girl is finally feeling better and sleeping without hacking, and having difficulty breathing. Yes, there was a lot of steaming water because they're trying to help her clear her lungs. And the doctor ends up telling Miss Barry, it's like, if it weren't for Anne, she wouldn't be alive. Your little girl would have died because I wouldn't have gotten here fast enough. So it's like, so basically Miss Barry forgives Anne, asks for her forgiveness, and her and Diana go back to being friends. So we also have the next, which is a concert, a catastrophe, and a confession. I can't remember what exactly happens. And then good imagination goes wrong, quite frequently happens with Anne. A new departure in flavorings, which is, I can't remember what this is. Anne is invited out to tea. I think this is where Anne meets Diana's very proper, I believe it's her great aunt, Diana, who is at first is very shocked by Anne, but ends up really liking her. And I believe she pops up in a couple other things. Anne comes to grief in an affair of honor, which I cannot remember what that is. Miss Stacy, who is the new teacher, because they had a male schoolmaster and he's left. So Miss Stacy and her pupils get up a concert. Now I listened to some of this in audiobook. So the teacher decides to set up basically a present, I don't know if there's a play or something, and of course Miss Lynde can't stand it because how dare they, and she thinks it's distracting, and it's very interesting. This is where I get the time period. Matthew insists on Puff's sleeves. This is him going and trying to find a dress for Anne because he loves her. And by this time Marilla does too. They've become close because Anne is now older. So and I believe he's getting her dressed for this concert. The story club is formed, which is where Diana and some of her, or Anne and some of her friends are helping Diana and some of the others come up with stories for basically essay writing for school. Vanity and vexation of spirit. I believe this is when Anne tries to dye her hair because she's sick of people teasing her for her red hair. The unfortunate Lily Maid. Now, another character that I haven't quite mentioned is Gilbert Blythe. He's very, very intelligent. He's a local. He teases the girls a lot, particularly Anne, for her red hair. And they are competing. They compete for the top spot in school. So, and I believe her and her friends are goofing off, and Anne gets stuck going down the river in a sinking boat, and Gilbert rescues her. And I think she still gets irritated with him. The epoch of Anne's life. So this is talking about, this is Anne's about 15 now. And for them, they finish school at about 16. Well, roughly about 15. So, because again, of the time period. So Anne and some of the other students, not Diana, become part of, basically she gets a choice to study for this exam to go into Queen's College in Charlotte, which is a teaching program. So, and the next class is the Queen's class is organized, which is where Miss Stacy is helping a certain group of the students, including Anne and Gilbert, prepare for the exam to get into Queen's College, where the brook and river meet, which I can't remember quite what that is. The pass list is out, which basically Anne gets off to school. The hotel concert, and I can't remember what this is. This is just a presentation. A Queen's Girl. This is when Anne goes off to school. The winter at Queen's. She's in college. The Glory and the Dream. This is when she finishes school. She gets her teaching certification. Strangely enough, so does Gilbert and her other friends. The Reaper whose name is Death. Unfortunately, this is when Matthew dies. And then The Bend in the Road. And this is when Anne, oddly enough, Gilbert switches with her so she could teach at Avonlea School and be closer because Marilla is going blind. And in order to keep Green Gables, she chooses to stay and help take care of Marilla. It shows how close the two have become, and that Anne has become very much a daughter to Marilla, and that continues. So this is, I'll be doing Anne of Avonlea, which is sitting next to me, along with the rest of the series as we go on. But this is the first story. It's very interesting. Again, Anne is between the ages of 11 and about 16 at this time. So it very much shows you the time period where she's going to be a teacher, and that's really what happens in Anne of Avonlea. This is her years of, I believe this is 3 years, where she's teaching at Avonlea School. So between the ages of between the ages of 16 and 18. So that's what happens in that one. And it is common, her being a 16-year-old, she's considered an adult and is able to teach. As is Gilbert, and then I think another one of her other friends. I think Gilbert ends up teaching at White Sands, which is another school, though that could have been one of her other friends that does that. So when those three finish Queen's College, the teaching program, within a year. So, and which very much mirrors what Lucy Maud Montgomery did. She went to Queen's College, she became a teacher. She didn't particularly like it. Anne likes it to a point. So it's very, very different. I'll do some foreshadows. She does eventually quit teaching and become a wife, and Gilbert becomes a doctor. So, mind you, at the end of, I think the next book is when he decides. So, but it's also a very interesting thing. You think, kids today, they turn 18, they go off to college, they spend 4 years in college, and they go on either to graduate school or their career. Here, Anne finishes regular school. Again, they're in a one-room schoolhouse. At around 16, or actually around 15, goes off to get a teaching certificate at 16 and starts teaching in the one-room schoolhouse at 16, as do her friends. And then she teaches for 3 years before going on to future on to college. Now, the reason Gilbert is doing this is because he needs to pay for university. Sari, or Kendra, not now. But it is a very interesting introduction. There's a lot of description here. Anne is very imaginative. So there's a lot of flowy words. There's a lot of fancy descriptions of Prince Edward Island and what is going on and how Anne experiences the world. So this is definitely seen through the eyes of Anne Sherley. It's a wonderful book. Probably a great to read aloud. The chapters are self-contained. So again, this came out in 1908. I think Lucy Montgomery loosely based this kind of in inspiration of her childhood. And this is the main thing that people think of. Anne of Green Gables. They have a whole tourist site. Prince Edward Island very much uses this to their advantage. It was a very popular book at the time. In fact, Lucy Montgomery's uncle tore down the house that she grew up in because he was pissed that she became how famous her story had become. And I don't know if there were people already visiting, but he tore down the house. I think they have a recreation now, or I believe she might have had a unmarried aunt and uncle who she based Marilla and Matthew off of, and their house is still standing. But they very much have recreated it, and their tours and everything. If you go to Prince Edward Island, it is gorgeous. Me and my husband went there on our honeymoon for a couple of days. It was part of an entire 3-week trip. Be careful. There's a lot of Japanese. Let me explain that. So many years ago, and I think there's probably stories written on this, a Canadian woman was teaching in Japan, and when she left her copy of Anne of Green Gables there, and her co-teacher translated it into Japanese, and has been part of their school curriculum for a long time. So yeah, there's a whole Japanese following. They have in Japan, I don't know where, they have a whole theme park kind of thing surrounded by Anne of Green Gables. It is very, very, very big in Japan. And so they come to, and even we saw them, there's a lot of Japanese tourists who are coming to this site on Prince Edward Island, which is kind of interesting. That interesting history there. Something L.M Montgomery probably never thought of in a million years, that eventually her story would be beloved around the world, and in particularly in Japan. So she did see some of the movies made, not the ones I think we've seen, and she was not happy about it. She actually was in court with her American publisher because they weren't paying her enough. So yeah, there was that. But back to the story. This is a very fun book. Definitely a great read aloud book. And the age range. I'm gonna guess late elementary, middle school. Definitely can read it in high school. Again, this is something I would consider classic literature. It's classic children's literature. So it can be read to young kids. There is kind of warning. Again, a couple of things are mentioned. Obviously, Matthew dies at the end. That can be traumatizing for children. He has a heart attack. There's talk of consumption, i.e. tuberculosis. Very, very common. There's Minnie May, which is the name of Diana's little sister, who is getting sick from the coop, which strangely enough, I have no idea what is. I'm guessing it's some sort of chest infection. I do not think it's whooping cough, though. I can do a quick Wikipedia check here. Do a quick Wikipedia check here. Look into Wikipedia. C-O-U-P. No. Let's see. I need to look up childhood illnesses. Yeah, no. Hopefully I will mention it in Anne of Avonlea. I will look that up later. But again, there's and that continues on through the book series. It's just, it's a kind of a warning if your kids can't go. I do believe I don't think there's any deaths in Anne of Avonlea. I think Anne of the Island, one of her friends, Ruby, dies of tuberculosis. Later books, Anne actually has a child that only lives for a couple of hours. And there's that. There's a couple of other things. The books, I wouldn't say they get darker, but these are historical fiction, and they reflect the time period and what would have been common to the children reading them and to L.M Montgomery as she was writing them. So that is something to take into account. So these are what I would consider historical fiction. In many ways, I would consider almost these a primary source because they were popular fiction at the time that they came out and reflect what people's lives, particularly on Prince Edward Island in Nova Scotia, at the time that they were written. So it gives you a look into the history and the lifestyles of people on Prince Edward Island and in Nova Scotia at this time. So that's the end of this video. If you like what you see, be sure to check out the rest of the channel. I am covering all of the Anne of Green Gables series. Yes, the cat is meowing. Yes, we're ignoring her. She wants out. I'll let her out in a minute when I'm done with this. That includes Anne of Avonlea, Anne of the Island. That's Rilla of Ingleside. That's the last book. That's her daughter. Do I have 2 copies of Anne of the Island? Anne of Ingleside. Anne of the Winnie Populars, Anne's House of Dreams, and Rainbow Valley. Rainbow Valley and Rilla of Ingleside have to do with Anne's children, of which I believe she has 5. So I will be covering all of those. I will also be covering a whole bunch of her short stories, and then doing the Sullivan films, as well as the TV show The Road to Avonlea. So all of that will be done and be bouncing across this, along with a bunch of other stuff. I do theme stuff. Balancing off this, of course, is my brief reviews of the Animorph series, which I will warn you, the very last 4 videos were done by me, unfortunately, skimming through the summaries because I did not have time. This is the 15th of June. I was sick. We went on vacation. I have a kid. Things got busy, so I am behind. But these I'm doing in full detail because I love these books. So again, like and subscribe, leave a positive comment if you have one, and check out the rest of the channel. Thank you.